Hello, everyone. It's so good to see you. It is 2022, and this is our first live Ask Me Anything of the new year. We're so glad you're here. My name is Jeannie Walters, and I am the founder and CEO of Experience Investigators. And today we're going to be talking about how to really plan for customer experience success in 2022. We have a ton of stuff to share with you today, and hopefully, it will help you really hit the ground running and take off for success this year. Now, as you join us, we love hearing where you're from. We love hearing about the weather where you are. That's a big topic right now. But I'd also love to hear about your goals for the new year, whether they're professional or personal. What are you looking for this year? Now, as always, we have with us our Director of Marketing, David Hornreich. David, how are you?
I'm great. It's great to be back. It's been a couple months since we've done one of these, so it's cool and exciting, and I'm a little nervous to be back in the saddle.
Well, we are always happy to see you, and you are in Seattle. So, what's the weather like in Seattle right now?
It has been pouring down rain, and we had a week's worth of snow before this, so we actually have flooding in the town that I
Oh,
live in. All sorts of flood warnings, and I may actually, I haven't checked, but our house is behind a single road that is has a bridge over a creek. That creek seems to have flooded, so I might actually be trapped
oh my goodness,
behind floodwaters right now. But it's okay. My wife got us lots of canned goods and soup, so we are
you're
ready to
set.
go. And thanks to the magic of the internet, I can join everyone all around the world.
There you go. Well, I'm glad that you're safe and well, and hopefully that will continue.
Thanks.
Just like everybody. Gosh, we have to say that these
Yeah.
years now, but uh, and we've talked about our goals for experienced investigators, and one of our big goals is to reach even more customer experience leaders and
Mhm.
to help them so that we can provide fewer ruined days for even more customers. And that gets me really excited thinking about how far we've come since we've started these live sessions and the feedback that we've gotten. CX leaders are really ready to take this on. And I am very excited about supporting them through some new and exciting ways this year, right?
Absolutely. And it's such a universal thing. Like we are all customers
Hmm.
and virtually all of us are employees. And so improving the customer experience and the employee experience, it really does impact everybody in the world. It sounds kind of corny, but it
It's
can make
true.
the world a better place. And so what a great objective to have in
Yeah,
2022.
I agree. I agree. Well, we do have a lot to cover, so I think we should jump in. But
Let's
as
do it.
people have questions, drop them in the chat. Anything else they need to know? David will be covering those questions once we get to that part. So for now, let's talk about planning. Now, some of you are probably thinking, well, hang on a second. We've already done our planning, but hopefully this will give you some more tools, resources, things that will really support the plans and the goals that you have for this year. So, first of all, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Jeannie Walters, founder and president and CEO of Experience Investigators. Our mission is to create fewer ruined days for customers. We do that through training, through keynote speaking, through workshops with clients, as well as consulting like customer journey mapping and things like that. So, if you are so inclined, we love finding you on social and our blog and everything else. So, feel free to contact us there. So, first of all, what are we talking about? Well, one of my favorite quotes, and this has been attributed to a few different people, so I'm going to paraphrase, but I think it was Eisenhower actually, who is known for saying that plans are worthless, but planning is everything. And I tend to agree with this. The act of planning can be very empowering about making sure that you know what direction to go, you know what your obstacles are, what your challenges are that you have to overcome. The plans themselves don't always work out exactly the way that we want them to. That's okay. What we're doing today is really looking at what are some of those ways that you can get those foundational pieces of your planning in the right place so that you can build that momentum throughout the year for your entire customer experience situation. So you might be starting off a customer experience program. You might be continuing one. You might be evolving. You might be responding to all of the changes that we're having in the world, both with the pandemic, of course, as well as some of these weather events we just talked about, supply chain issues, all of those things impact your customer experience. So while planning can be very effective, we also have to be ready to bob and weave as those things happen. What we're hoping is that these foundational things that we will share today will really help you have that structure in place so you can be flexible and adaptable as those changes come up. So, we're going to be covering a lot of things today. I will be going through things pretty quickly, but rest assured, we have an article for you that goes through all of these things and includes links to videos and resources and different things that will help you as well. So, if I go too fast today, don't worry. If you go to that article, it's all this information as well as a whole bunch of links and resources for you. So, first of all, we're going to define what success means to you. Some of you have heard me say this before. We want to set clear goals and how to measure them. We want to clearly align these CX goals with what's most important to your leaders. This is one of those things that sometimes we skip if we're just focused on CX, and it's a really key point. We want to help other leaders in our organizations communicate how their team goals are connected to customer experience success. Because just like David said in the beginning, when customer experience succeeds, everyone succeeds. Everyone in your organization, and then it goes out beyond that as well. We're going to talk about customer journey maps. How do we actually leverage this? How do we make sure that we are gaining that buy-in as we're using some of those best practices like customer journey mapping? And then how do we create communication strategies? How do we make sure that we are ensuring that everybody in the organization hears about customer experience and the goals and the efforts around that in a way that is consistent so that it's not one of those things that they say, oh, this is the flavor of the month. This is something that our leader cares about right now, but it's going to go away. Customer experience has to be part of the DNA of your organization. Communication is a huge part of that. We also will talk about how do you get those other leaders as part of a cross-functional team. And then how do you eventually add a more formal structure to that customer experience championship program that many of you probably have set up by this point? If not, we'll talk about that too. There's more. How do we work with our human resources leaders, the people who are managing the employee experience, who are handling hiring and all of those important things? How do we make sure that our CX priorities are part of that world? How do we educate around that throughout the employee journey? And then we're going to collaborate on employee recognition programs. We want to make sure that the people who deliver on the customer experience, who help us succeed, they are recognized for that work in a way that helps other people say, hey, I want to be recognized that way too. And then, of course, throughout any customer experience program, initiative, anything, as a leader, we need to report our results. So, what's the best way to do that? So, like I said, today we're going to be staying pretty high level, going pretty quickly. Feel free to reach out if you do have questions. Feel free to drop your questions into the chat right now as we continue on. So let's talk first about defining what customer experience success means in your organization. Now, I talk about this a lot because this is where I see a lot of customer experience programs fall down. We understand things like what a sales goal is in business. We understand things like, what a hiring goal is in business. But when we talk about customer experience, sometimes those goals get very loose. People say things like, well, our goal is to deliver exceptional customer experience. If that's not well defined, then we will get to a point later on, maybe a year later, maybe 3 years, where somebody says, "Well, are we doing that? I don't really know. I guess customer experience isn't really a thing." Now, of course, customer experience is a thing. It's a mindset, it's a business strategy, and it requires business discipline, just like any other part of business. And so when we look at how do we define that success, we have a formula we use called a customer experience success statement. We also start with the mission. If you start with your customer experience mission statement, then that becomes your North Star. That becomes, you know what, this is who we are to our customers no matter what. This is what they expect from us. It helps you understand how to prioritize those goals moving forward. So, as you start on this journey, as you evolve, make sure you know what is our customer experience mission. And we have resources for you, but that is one of the most important things you can do to make sure that the rest of your plans will succeed. We also want to set clear goals. Now, here's the thing about customer experience. If we don't have buy in from other leaders, if we don't really understand how our goals are connected, then they can fall pretty flat because we only have so much that we're responsible and accountable for. We need the buy in of those other leaders. So when we talk about goals, one of the things that I like to do is use the SMIRC methodology. Now, this is something that we developed to just keep in mind, kind of like SMART goals, if you've heard of that acronym. This is about being social, measurable, inspiring, relevant, and contextual. And so you can learn more about that with the checklist. You can learn more about that in that article I mentioned. But really, if we don't make sure that we're hitting all of these marks in the SMART framework, then it's easy for goals to feel loose, to feel like they're not going to succeed, or to have other leaders say, why does this really matter? So we need to make sure that we're following that SMIRC methodology, and we need to have that success statement. The success statement is something that can really help you align your goals with the organizational goals and your leadership goals, which is why this next point is so important. We want to make sure that we are clearly aligning these CX goals with what's most important to the leaders of our organization. Because, as you can imagine, leaders have different objectives, different priorities. We need to get them on board with this, and we need to make sure that they understand that if customer experience succeeds, they succeed as well. Those goals will be met because there is literally no part of the organization that is not impacted by the customer experience. If you have happy customers who spend more, who refer more to you, who are more likely to stay with your brand, that is the very definition of business success. But we need to break that down and make sure that our chief financial officer really understands that, you know what, great CX also means reduced expenses in service. And so we have to calculate all of that for them and make sure that they understand that. So whenever you're talking with your leaders, make sure that you are connecting that dot. And thank you. David just put up the link for our calculator tool to figure out your customer lifetime value. That can be a very key part of understanding what is the actual value of customer experience. So as we move through this, we need to help other leaders not just understand, but also communicate how their team goals are connected to CX success. So this is really about understanding who's on your team here, who understands CX, and who is ready to go ahead uh, and keep that cadence of communication up. Make sure that they are an ambassador for customer experience with their team. If we can get other leaders involved who understand that, who can communicate that, then it starts spreading throughout the organization. Then people really understand, you know what, this is important not just to the CX team, but it's important to my leader as well. I'm going to make sure that we deliver on our piece of this for the customer experience. Part of that, this is applying the same best practices that you would for a customer program. You want to make sure you're tapping into those leaders and saying, what feedback do you have about our customer experience and our program? What can we do to help you make sure that we can deliver on this more? Make sure it's a two-way communication, that you have structure around it, that you have ways to reach out, but you really want to make a goal this year. If you have no other goal, as a CX leader, make a goal to increase the number of customer experience ambassador leaders throughout your organization. That will help everything else move forward. And then we have certain tools we use in customer experience that can be incredibly helpful here. One, of course, is customer journey mapping. Those of you who have been here before probably have heard me say that this is a verb, not a noun. It's not about the map, it's about the mapping. So make sure that you are using these best practices to get those other leaders involved so that they can be connected to the outcomes. They start understanding the actual customer journey more and their place in it, that they are really making sure that they are understanding the customer's true journey, not the internal process maps that they might believe, not just what happens within their part of the organization. They have to understand that if things are set up that way for the customer, they become siloed, inconsistent, and it delivers a poor customer experience at the end of the day. So use customer journey mapping as a way to connect with different leaders, get them involved, get them to really understand, and to bring that back to their teams as well. And then, I mean, this is about the fourth thing I think I've mentioned about around communication, but this is so, so important. One of the things that I like to do is actually look at, okay, what do we have maybe for the next 12 months? Work with your internal communications team if you have one, but look for, okay, where do we really need to emphasize customer experience throughout the organization? What do we want everybody to understand? If you've created that customer experience mission statement, making sure that that gets in front of people, that that is used as a tool, not just a poster on a wall. Use it as a tool. Make sure that you're communicating about that throughout the year to different organizations, different teams. Everybody in the organization needs to really understand what that mission statement is. Then you want to move into, okay, what are those cycles maybe we have? What are those places where we know, you know what, this is our busiest time. Sometimes our shipping gets delayed. What can we communicate about the customer experience before those key parts of our customer life cycle? So look at your calendar, figure all that out, make sure that you're proactively communicating throughout your organization so that it's not a surprise to anyone. It's not something where everybody says, oh my gosh, this happened last year too, and our customers are mad and we didn't know about it. If you know certain things, make sure you're communicating that proactively and invite that feedback again. Make sure that you have a way to hear from people throughout your organization as they learn more about customer experience, as they learn more about what success means in your organization. Make sure they have a way to share insights and feedback back because they are going to see things that you just can't see. If you have frontline workers, people like that, customer service reps, customer success agents, cashiers in retail, anybody like that, you want to make sure they have a two-way street so that when they see things happening in the customer experience, they're going to see those things potentially before those surveys tell you. They're going to see things before it lands on your voice of the customer program. So make sure you have that way that they can say, you know what, I'm noticing that the lines have been really long here for the last month and I don't know what's going on, but this is happening or whatever. So make sure that they have a way to communicate as well. And then the companies that do this really well, the organizations that really lead with customer experience as the center of everything they do this by having a team of cross-functional leadership because CX is a team sport. We need other people in order to succeed. So as we get these insights from our voice of the customer program, as we make sure that we're hearing from the different employees and we're getting that data and that feedback about what needs to change, we need the leaders who are accountable for those areas to be part of this so that we can actually implement change, so that we can actually take action on the insights that are gathered. So I am a big believer in a CX charter. And what this does is it basically says, this is why we're all here. Because if you come into that CX team and you are only representing marketing, then you're going to miss out on the priorities that are most important to the customer. The leaders around that table have to actually really understand we are prioritizing based on that customer experience mission statement and based on how we've defined customer experience success. Sometimes that means you have to make hard choices. We don't have, you know, unlimited supplies of resources, of money, of people. And so sometimes we have to make choices as leaders on these cross-functional teams about how can we prioritize what? How can we make sure that we're doing this on behalf of the customer and not just on behalf of our little piece of the org chart? That's what this will do. So you want to use your data, you want to use your organizational goals, and you want to continue to prioritize on behalf of what success means to your organization and on behalf of the customers in general, not just from that one part of the org chart. And then many of you probably have something like a CX champion program. Sometimes they have different names, but essentially this is where a lot of times customer experience starts kind of organically. And so what that means is we identify different change agents among us and we say, "Hey, will you please represent the customer in every meeting you have in your department? Will you make sure that you are learning about customer experience? Will you attend these lunch and learns?" But it's almost like a volunteer position. And where we need to go is making more structure around that, getting that a little more formalized. Because otherwise, that person could be a great volunteer, but maybe they get a different role and they move off. And then that team is kind of left thinking customer experience doesn't really matter. We have to really make sure that we are putting enough formality to these things so that it feels like a business discipline, because that's what it is. If we don't apply the same rules to customer experience that we do to other parts of business like sales or finance or marketing, then we're basically saying it's negligible. And of course, we know that's not true. So as you are looking around at those change agents, work with them and say, what can we do to make this more formal? How can we make sure that we're reaching out to the right teams throughout our organization? Those people who raised their hand, who said, "Yes, I want to do this," they are the people that you really want to put in those leadership roles. Hopefully, if they're doing this on top of their job, they should be recognized for that. They should be paid for it, frankly, but I know sometimes that's not always in the cards. But anything you can do to really recognize these folks and make their lives easier, that will help you disseminate this idea that customer experience is part of your brand and it's just how you do business. It's not something to tack on. It's something about who you are. And the employee journey, the employee experience, there is nothing more important to the customer experience. The only way you can deliver a great customer experience is if you have employees who understand it, who care about it, and frankly, who are happy. And so that means you have to look at the employee experience, the employee journey, and think about where are the places where we need to reinforce these customer experience strategies and goals. How can we get our HR leaders on board to make sure that we are hiring based on our customer experience mission, that we're getting the right people in the right places based on that, that we're providing what employees need in order to deliver on the customer experience? So, this is really working hand in hand with your human resources group. And I will tell you what, there are so many passionate HR leaders and sometimes they've just never been asked to do this type of thing. They get so into it. It's one of my favorite things. You get passionate HR people, and they're like, you know what? We're developing our learning and development plan. We're going to have customer experience all over this. That's the type of thing that you want to do and partner with them. They are incredible leaders in your organization, and they want to do this with you. We just have to communicate and make sure we're partnering with them. And then that employee recognition piece I spoke about earlier, this is so important because sometimes we recognize employees for very objective things like sales goals, like revenue or, different things like that. Customer experience can feel a little different. And so defining what's most important and how can we really recognize one another to really do this. I've seen this done so many different ways, but really you want to tie it back to that mission. Make sure that people are living up to your customer experience mission and that you are recognizing them for doing that. That's where you really start seeing this take off within your organization and make sure that other people are recognizing, oh, I get it. They went above and beyond because they were able to do that because they knew it was going to live up to that mission. So as you move forward, think about what are the various ways you can recognize different employees who really live up to that and exceed those expectations based on the customer experience mission. And then, of course, we have to report our results, right? We have to make sure that we are sharing what we're doing throughout the organization. And sometimes in customer experience, it's very easy to kind of just lean on the very objective quantitative data. This is where our NPS went. This is how many surveys went out, et cetera, et cetera. That's all really important information, but it's not the only information. When we are talking about customer experience, we are talking about human beings, and we can never, ever forget that. So, as you think about reporting your results, tying it all back to those goals for your success statement, tying it back to your mission statement, making sure that you're including some data around the employee experience and recognition and things like that, you want to share the human side of things as well. You can do this with customer stories. You can do this by sharing the audio recording from customer service calls. You can have video testimonials, all sorts of things. But really, we want to make sure that we're not just sending a spreadsheet or a dashboard and saying this is our customer experience, because that's a piece of how to measure it, but it's not the only way. And nothing moves people more than hearing about other human beings. And so, if you want to make change in your organization, if you want to get momentum from those leaders that you're reporting results to, share stories. That's what gets people to really change what's in their heart and not just their head. And so what happens is they'll say, wow, we can't ever let this happen to a customer again. What can we do about it? And suddenly you get the investment you need. Or they say, this is incredible. How can we do this for all of our customers? And you make sure that you get what you need for that too. It's all about getting that buy in, influencing through stories, through data, through all the hard work that you're doing. So, just a few things for you, right? So, carry on. You can have this done by February. Really, the reason that we wanted to share all of these things was because this is one of the many ways that you can move forward with customer experience. You can pick and choose some of these. Maybe this year you're starting from a place where, you're kind of rebooting, or maybe you're building your CX team right now. Look at what you need. Do you need a charter? Do you need a mission statement? Do you need that success statement? How can you communicate with leaders cross-functionally? How can you make sure that you're getting customer experience out there as a way you do business, as a discipline, and not just a program, a project, or, heaven forbid, a flavor of the month? So as you move through this, don't feel overwhelmed. Wherever you're starting today is where you need to start. That's the beauty of this too. There is no perfect formula for this. I will be the first one to say that. But there are tools you can use. There are foundational pieces you can, get in place that will help you longer term and help you shift as those plans change, which they might. So if you're having something like a supply chain issue, you might want to rely on a communication strategy. You might want to look at customer journey mapping and say, how do we make sure that this doesn't happen again? Or how do we make sure that we're communicating the expectations in the right way for our customers? This is all about being flexible and adaptable. But if you have those foundational pieces in line, then you can say, okay, how do we do this and still live up to our mission? How do we do this and still meet the goals of that success statement? How do we report this out in not just quantitative ways, but in ways that really impact the human experience as well? So those are the types of things that I hope help you as you move forward. But I just want to, mention here that we talk about how to do this in a year. This is a lot to fit in a year. And what I see over and over again with setting goals around customer experience is that they're either way too broad and lofty, or we kind of forget that sometimes we need to put things in place. Just like budgeting, if you've ever tried to budget, it's very hard to start from scratch. You need data in order to budget. Same thing with customer experience. So if you say we're going to have, XYZ in our metrics by the end of the year, then that might not really work if you don't have any data to begin. And maybe you don't even have a tool. You don't even know how you're going to collect that data. So as you work through your goals for the year, remember to say, what are the baby steps we need to take? Maybe the goal for the year is to find the tool and start using the tool so that by the end of the year, you have that data. That is a clear goal. Just make sure you're getting specific enough so that you know whether or not you're successful. Delivering exceptional customer experience, delivering a great customer experience, those aren't real goals. Those are not measurable, they're not specific enough. So make sure that you are getting really clear about those goals and that you're always tying it back to that mission. So, wherever you are on your journey, I wish you so much luck on this and support. And hopefully, the article, the tools, the resources that we have will support you in doing that. But at this point, I would love to find out if we have questions and hear what some of you might be dealing with.
Yeah. Thanks, Jeannie. That was a lot to get through. So I appreciate you, and I appreciate everybody who joined us for hanging in there and following along and keeping up. We've got some questions from the community. Let's start with one that is very relevant to this topic and the article that we released earlier this week. They said, it feels like we have a lot of these things in place, but they're inconsistent or incomplete. How would you recommend we improve what we already have in place?
Great question. So I would say kind of walk through it as we highlighted it here, where you start with the mission and you say, do we have that? Do we have a success statement? Is that very, very clear? Then you can use those two tools to kind of bounce everything up against. So if you have these things that are incomplete or inconsistent, you can start saying, okay, does this live up to the mission? Does it fit into our success definition? And then I am a big fan of roadmaps where you literally kind of map out, where do we need to be? What do we need to be doing? And this is where also that cross-functional team can be very, very helpful. A lot of times what happens is people get very excited about something, they start it, and then it kind of dies on the vine. And so I've seen things where one team will start a survey program that's completely off in space, like they are doing it on their own. And then somebody else is starting a survey program over here. And so then they go, oh, well, we both shouldn't do this. And they both stop. And then suddenly nobody's asking any questions. So things like that, if you have that cross-functional CX team, you can start centralizing that information. You can start prioritizing the right things, and you can put governance around it, which is really what this is all about. I'm just not a fan of the word governance. It sounds so bleh, but it's true. We need it. So when we have that cross-functional team and that clear CX charter, that can help a lot with making sure that you're grabbing all of those things that are kind of CX ad hoc or rogue teams or anything like that. You can pull that together in that centralized space. That's what I'd recommend.
Excellent. We've got a question from Gabriella. Gabriella asks if you could expand a bit more on the formal structure that you talked about, or if you can recommend any additional reading or resources.
So I think you're asking about the CX champion program structure. I'm going to go with that because I think that's where I mentioned it the most. Let me know if that's incorrect. But yeah, so I think this is like anything else where if we talk about things where we are, one of the things I say a lot is that if we talk about CX as a priority, but then we don't fund it, that's not really a priority. And the same thing can happen with CX champion programs where we say, we're going to have all these great volunteer change agents and they're just going to learn and share and it's going to be great. But we don't give them anything for that. We don't give them even time for that. We don't actually recognize that as part of their job. It's just tacked on to their job. So what I like to do is make a case for, okay, if we're saying that they're going to do all these things to bring CX into their teams, to learn, to do all these things, how much time is that worth? And really making sure that you are, applying things like, time-bound goals and saying, okay, if we can do this within the next 6 months with our champions, what do we do next? What are we really asking them to do? How are we defining success for them? And can we say, 10% of their time now is going to be dedicated to the CX program? Can you work with their bosses, their teams to make sure that it's recognized in that way? Otherwise, it just feels really unfair when we do this to people because we sometimes are asking them to really take on an important role, and yet we're not really recognizing it as a formal role. And so that's where, if we can formalize that, if we can make sure that we are moving forward with that in a way, just like any other thing, we wouldn't ask somebody, for instance, we wouldn't say, okay, you are now going to be a volunteer salesperson. And we're going to add that. I know you're in engineering, but we're going to add that to your role. And we're not going to give you any more time, or we're not going to increase your pay. We're not going to give you any recognition. We're just kind of expecting that because, I don't know, sales feels like the right thing to do. We wouldn't do that, but we do that with customer experience. So that's what I mean by formalizing it. Treat it like anything else. If it's a priority, we need to fight for funding. We need to fight for resources. If our leadership is saying it's a priority, we need to say, okay, we need to understand and you need to show how it's a priority here. So that's the formality that I'm talking about. So hopefully that helps.
Yeah, that's great. We've got a question from Amo and me, and I will take this opportunity to just give a slight tangent and say I love these sessions because they give me an opportunity to learn new pronunciations of names. If I miss anybody's pronunciation, please let me know. I'd love to get it right. So when you join us in the future, we can get that right. In any case, this question I love. Is there a difference between a CX mission and the organizational mission? And if so, does the organization's mission define what the CX mission should be? I couldn't love this question more.
I love this question too. Great question. So, yes, they're different, but they can be the same. How confusing is that? So, the organizational mission tends to be something about kind of the company, right? It starts from that company perspective of this is who we are, this is where we want to be, this is all those things. The customer experience mission is about what do you want your customers to do with your product services, and how will you show up for them? So, for example, one of my favorite examples that is both, and I'm going to paraphrase here, but IKEA has a really good organizational mission. They don't talk about their products. They don't talk about how they are, selling furniture. What they talk about is making everyday lives of people better. That's a great place to start because if you think about that, what does that mean? That means that in any point along the customer journey, that should be part of the customer experience mission. So sometimes we need to refine from that organization. Sometimes it needs to be totally separate. I see a lot of organizational missions that say things like, we will deliver shareholder value and be best in class. That is so far away from a customer experience mission. You can't even start there. So essentially what you have to figure out is, who are you to your customers? Who will you always be? What are you helping them do? And we have a whole workbook on this that you can download. It's available for free. You can just go ahead and fill that out to help you really think through these questions around that mission that will really serve the customer experience, because that becomes something internally that you can start challenging each other on. You can say, does this live up to our customer experience mission? The mission of my company, which I've shared, is to create fewer ruined days for customers. And we use that. We ask ourselves, if what we're doing today, will that actually help us live that mission? If we have to make choices, will that help us live this mission? Because at the end of the day, it's about the customers. And so that's the type of thing you need to look at, is what are we really trying to do for our customers? And who are we to our customers? How do we show up for them? What's most important? Sometimes we have to make trade-offs. We have to understand that we can't always be the fastest and the most accurate, right? So we have to make those trade-offs and understand, who are we all the time, no matter what. That's what that mission is about.
Love it. We've got another question from Gabriella. When it comes to doing customer research, do you believe that an external company can do a better job than an internal resource?
Yeah, this is a good one. I personally have seen that customers sometimes don't want to share as much with the actual company. And I'll give you a few examples. If you're in B2B, you might have a customer success manager or an account manager. If they're the ones who are collecting information from customers, that's still a personal relationship. So somebody might not want to share, gosh, I'm not as happy as I used to be. I am actually shopping around. They might not share that directly with somebody because they still have a relationship with that individual or with that company. You can do a lot of research inside your organization based on what's publicly available, based on customers sharing things like user reviews or when they go on your site and submit things. So there are lots of ways to do research, but when it comes to talking to customers directly, I have found that a third party, you'll get more honest communication. And that's because we often forget, but people do consider these relationships. And think about the relationships you have in your life. It's hard to look somebody in the eye and say, wow, you really disappointed me. That's hard. And so if it's a third party, it feels safer. And so they can share that. So it really does depend on the type of research you're doing. You can do a lot on your own, but when it comes to talking directly to customers, I have found that that's where third party outside resources can be very, very effective.
And we've got a follow-up question from Kim Hong that is right along those lines. When we conduct interviews with stakeholders or our customers, are there approaches or frameworks that we can
Mhm.
use to avoid biases that come from our assumptions and shared knowledge? Great, great question.
Great question. And I'm so glad that you brought up the idea of bias in general because it's so important. We all have bias. We all come in with preconceived notions. We all have different understandings. We have different worldviews. And so we have to kind of acknowledge that. That's part of it. But I would say one of my favorite questions for customers is simply, what didn't we ask you about that we should have? And that's where you'll find some really interesting feedback. That's where you'll find people who maybe share a worldview that you didn't even think of. And so that's one thing. The other is, as we use more technology, more AI, machine learning, things like that to get some of this research done, we have to be very aware of the bias in that as well. And so making sure that we are aware is half of that. We have some resources about how to conduct customer interviews, and that includes things like that question. Oh, there you go. David's so good. See? And so the way we approach this is, first of all, you do have to acknowledge that you have bias and that sometimes we are not aware of what we're not aware of. And so that's why I like questions like that. I like the open ended. I like making sure that there are lots of different ways for people to communicate because some people are not as comfortable with chatbots. Some people are not as comfortable with calling on the phone. So making sure that people have different ways of communicating, not based on our needs, but based on their needs. That's one way that bias shows up as well. So it's a big topic, and it's something that we all have to continually work on. We have to really make sure that we are constantly thinking and kind of staying open-minded when we get feedback that maybe we did bring in bias or maybe one of our bots brought in bias. We have to be very open about that feedback because that's a very real thing.
Not a question, but I want to shout out Tanu, who is going to be
Mm.
starting a job as a CX analyst in a few days.
Yay!
Congratulations.
Congratulations. Yeah, that's so exciting.
Super exciting, and I hope our resources are helpful for you. Of course, we've got a lot more on experienceinvestigators.com, so check that out.
Definitely.
Yeah, good luck. I want to shift to a question that came in from email
Mhm.
earlier. And this is about responding to negative reviews. The question asks, we get a good amount of negative reviews on Quora, but we're confused about the best approach to responding. Should we reply to these from our company's handle, or should we create a community of our existing users to reply to them? And for context, they are in B2C.
Well, I mean, I'm always going to say be transparent when you are responding because it's not just the one complaint, it's people watching how you respond to that complaint. If it's big and meaty and detailed, you probably want to take that offline. You probably want to suggest to them, let's deal with this one on one, but you want to say that publicly. So I would say if you are part of the company and you're responding, you want to be very transparent about that so people understand that it's not there's nothing deceptive going on. Um, I would also say that if you can reach out and make sure that you're closing the loop however you can, meaning that if somebody has a complaint and some people do just complain, that's how they are. But we still want to address that. We still want to say, here are the resources, here are the ways that we can deal with that. We want to make sure that we are closing the loop with them as much as possible directly, but we also want to talk about that in the public comments. So you want to say things like, I'm happy to reach out, or this is how we solved it, or something like that, so that other people see you closing that loop as well. But David, I know you have some experience with some of this too, so I'd be interested in your thoughts as well.
Yeah, simply coming from a marketing background, of course, one of the things that we always recommend, like you said, Jeannie, is be transparent. Um, don't argue with the person. We always say just acknowledge them and then invite them, direct them to where they can have that issue resolved offline. And by offline, I just mean outside of the channel where they're putting their complaint, whether that's Quora or in a Google review or a Facebook review or anything like that.
Mhm.
Um, and one of the things that the question asker mentioned was, should we get our happy customers to respond? I wouldn't recommend asking anybody to directly respond to another customer. But it's a great idea to invite your happy customers to share their experiences in general. And, that can be automated in some cases where if they've said that they're happy, you can then invite them with a single click of a link to leave a review. Or if you have this is maybe more relevant to a B2B business, but if you have those relationships, kind of recognizing where those opportunities are when a customer talks about how happy they are or how satisfied they are, to just say, it would be really helpful if you could let other people know about this. It's
Mhm.
not going to get rid of the negative reviews, but it does kind of affect the ratio of positive to negative feedback that people are reading. And that can be really, really impactful.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, happy to share some marketing knowledge from my experience. Um, let's jump to a question from Hemang, who asks, what methods are there when it
Mm.
comes to conducting customer surveys?
Oh, there are so many. So, yeah, surveys come in all shapes and sizes now. And one of the things that, we're seeing more and more is that as people are getting more surveys, uh, they don't have as much patience to fill them out, frankly. Survey fatigue is a real thing. So, a lot of the things that I'm seeing that I like are those one question surveys. So, you might see this when you are calling into a contact center. They might say, stay on the phone, and you get that automated, did this answer your question, yes or no? Or how would you rate us? Or would you recommend us? Those types of classic questions on surveys. You can also see this more in like apps, mobile apps, where sometimes there's present um, survey opportunity right there. So it says leave feedback, and it's up to the customer to be proactive about it and say, yes, I want to leave feedback. The good thing is it's up to the customer there. They also can do that, based on where they are in the journey. So if they're having an issue in that part of the journey, or they have feedback on that part of the journey, you can see that based on where they actually access that proactive place of giving feedback. People still send mail surveys, people still send email surveys. There are so many different things. The one thing I will say about this is if you are starting a feedback program, just like anything else, you need to understand your goals with that, and you need to understand the structure of it. Meaning that if you say, hey, we're just going to start surveying our customers, if you don't know how you will take action on that feedback, then you're wasting everybody's time. You're wasting the customer's time, you're wasting your organization's time, everything. I have seen this happen over and over where we get very excited about collecting that feedback, but we don't yet have a feedback strategy. We don't understand what we will do with that feedback. It's very important you have that plan before you actually go out. Also, don't ask questions that you can't act on. If you are asking a bunch of questions about something that, is part of your payment process that you can't do anything about for the next 12 months, don't ask that question. That is wasting everybody's time as well. So make sure that you're really strategic about what you include in your surveys, as well as understanding that gathering feedback is a part of the customer journey. It is not separate. So sometimes we see things where people talk about the customer journey and then they talk about their feedback strategy like it's different. To the customer, that is part of the customer journey. So make sure the points where you're asking for feedback and sending out surveys and things like that, that is part of understanding where you are in the journey with your customer. Because we've all been customers where we get the same survey, maybe like in the same day. We are sometimes asked, a question, we answer it 10 times and we never hear back from anybody. We want to make sure that we have the best practices in place around closing the loop with the customer, that we understand how we're going to take action within our organization, and that we look at the feedback strategy as part of the overall customer journey. You want to make sure all of that is together in a robust voice of the customer program. There are so many ways to do this. There are so many incredible tools out there now that will help you with that. So, uh, there's no fast answer here, but I would encourage you to really think about what are your goals, what is the strategy, and how can you really respect the customer and their time and the feedback that they provide you. And that's all part of setting up for success when it comes to surveys.
Well, this has been a lot of information in about 50
I
minutes.
know I'm losing my voice.
Yeah, I want to thank everybody for being here and for asking some really great questions. I think that a lot of really interesting ideas were brought up even beyond the initial topic that we came in with. So this was really, really great. We will be doing these live sessions approximately every 2 weeks for the foreseeable future as schedules allow, but we are doing other webinars as well. I want to direct you to our weekly letter, which you can sign up here at bit.ly/genie-letter. And in that weekly letter, we highlight any of the other things that we've got going on. Coming up in a couple of weeks, we've got a free webinar that we're partnering with Medallia on, which we're really excited about. So you can learn about all the other things that we've got going on right here. Otherwise, Jeannie, final thoughts?
Yeah, I just want to thank everybody for being here. This is such a great way to kick off the year and to
Mhm.
hear what you're doing and to really make sure that, we are continuing this dialogue. I always get so much from learning from all of you. I really appreciate your questions. Of course, David, I always appreciate you and your insights and contributions as well. So thank you for being here. And really, we are here to support you. Like I said, our goal is to make sure that we are delivering even more for our customer experience leaders so that they can create fewer ruined days for their customers. We have big goals around that this year. That includes you. So I hope you will stick with us. I hope you'll sign up for that letter. Come visit us on the blog, LinkedIn, wherever we are. We want to hear from you. So thank you so much for being here and good luck with your 2022 customer experience plans. I'm Jeannie Walters. Thanks for